Alrighty, part two of our Cold War presentation. We're going to begin here with the Truman administration. He assumed office in 1945, right after the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he would remain president until 1953. He was from Missouri, Independence, Missouri, to be exact, and um, his take on the Cold War, his policy towards the Soviet Union, was to keep the communist threat uh, where it is. Roosevelt acknowledges its existence and its right to be there. However, Truman said that we don't want this to spread. So the idea is to contain communism to where it is at the moment. And historians will cite that the beginning of the Cold War begins 1945 under Truman. And if you remember that Truman was the one who leaked to Stalin, saying that we have the atomic bomb, and many say that this uh, capitulated the arms race and mutually assured destruction as a result. So something needs to be said about the Iron Curtain speech. This picture here, over here to your left, is that is Winston Churchill. He came to Fulton, Missouri, and gave his Iron Curtain speech. That's actually a picture from the event. And here's a quote from that speech. In a great number of countries far from the Russian frontiers and throughout the world, communist fifth columns are established and work in complete unity and absolute obedience to the directions they received from the communist center. So what is Churchill trying to say here? What he's trying to say is that there are these nations that are set up and they're communist, and they have their own government, they're sovereign supposedly, but they are taking orders from the Soviet Union. And that those orders are most likely the promulgation, the promotion of communist ideas. Churchill goes on to say in this speech that an iron curtain is falling across Europe, and that on one side you have the Soviet Union dominated nations, they are communist to the core, and on the other side of this iron curtain you have democratic societies that are capitalist to some extent, and this iron curtain is going to become a central motif in the Cold War era. The Truman Doctrine. Let's talk about this for a second. The key word here is containment, as we said at the beginning. Uh, you see this doctrine emerge with some problems that were happening in Greece and Turkey. They were in a lot of turmoil. They were in a bad way. They were in a bad situation. And rather than watching them fall to Stalin here, as you see in our political cartoon here, uh, it might behoove you to pause and just kind of analyze that for a minute. Uh, Greece and Turkey were in a bad shape, and instead of allowing them to fall to the communist threat, Truman opted to send financial support to them and prop them up. However, there was no military intervention, and that's important to realize, because the United States now has a policy to send aid to nations before we will send military support. Truman did not want any other nations to fall to communism. That was a central concept of his containment policy. So here we have the Marshall Plan, 1948. Germany is basically ruined, and because of all the bombing and all the aftermath of World War II. And Germany is then divided into these sections, and what becomes West Germany, it's ruled by and dominated by the Americans, the French, the British, and then we have East Germany. We have the Soviet blockade. The Soviet Union cut off their section of East Germany from the rest of West Germany. And there's a problem there because they divided Berlin, the capital. So you have West Berliners that are cut off from the rest of the democratic, free society, if you will, in West Germany. So there's no railroad, there's no highway that the Soviets allow to connect those 2 points. So in June of 1948, what we have is the Marshall Plan. The democratic societies here, they flew planes into West Berlin, dropping off food, dropping off resources, and coming to the aid of these West Berliners that are cut off from the rest of Germany. And let's not forget Oberpfaffenhofen. Um, I'm sure that's significant. I'm sure many people live there, but that's just a fun city name to say. And we have Finkenwerder up here, and Fußbüttel. I took a little German. I remember how to pronounce somewhat of it. And we're moving on. 1949, the tough year for the Truman administration. We'll coin it the year of loss, and these are some things that you may want to write down. Here we have Mao Zedong. He overthrows Kai-shek in China, and he becomes the Chinese version of the Soviet premier in China. Uh, and he sets up a Chinese government, a Chinese way of living there. And then we have over here, we have the Russian atomic test to prove that they are now in the atomic game. They are now able to drop a bomb and wipe out a city just like the Americans did at the end of World War II. This is a year of loss, because Truman lost both his access to China and trade, and he lost the leg up in the nuclear battle here, the nuclear arms race. We come to the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. June 25th, 1950, North Korea crosses the 38th parallel. This is kind of the idea here. Communists stay in the north. The capitalist democratic society is here in the south. But on that date, they crossed in, and they actually began to drive back all the way to September 1950. The South Korean forces until they're kind of pent back here on this little piece of land. Now the UN acts in South Korean interest. They act without Russia, but it kind of becomes pretty obvious that even though North Korea, they border China and they're allies with China, it becomes obvious that China is now allied with Russia, and they all have common interests to spread communism. And you have the North Koreans, the Chinese, and the Russians all working together, and so the UN acts in Russian absence. But let's be sure to make a comment here. Truman has no declaration of war from Congress. No declaration of war from Congress. And this kind of sets a precedent here that American presidents now, they can go to war without actually declaring war. Truman called it a police action. And you may see this kind of replicated throughout this era, that we don't actually have to declare war to go to war. This is an important precedent being set. Here you have the Incheon landing. So what we have is all these forces are backed up here. The UN actually sends a force and lands here in Incheon, cuts the communist forces off, and they drive them back up to the Yalu River near the Chinese border. Now, there happens to be a battle here at the Yalu River called the Yalu Slaughter. The American forces take the UN forces take heavy casualties, and they begin to drive them back down to the 38th parallel. And what we have here is the establishment of the border between the two. Now, the Eisenhower administration happened from 1953 to 1961. The Supreme Allied Commander of World War II is now president, and it kind of sends a message to the Soviet influence out in the world that the Americans aren't going to take anything anymore. We have this new theory, this domino theory, that is kind of dominating American foreign policy, that it's a little more aggressive than Truman's containment. We have this domino theory that we do not want nations to begin to fall one by one into a communist state. So it's a little more aggressive. Eisenhower campaigned, I will go to Korea. The hero of World War II is now pledging to end the war in Korea. And we have the Korean Armistice. July 27th, 1953, the Koreans agreed to this armistice. Really at the we'll call it intimidation of Eisenhower, threatening the nuclear option. North Korea backs down from this, and to be honest, Korea is still technically at war. There is an armistice. There is, they don't lob missiles at each other anymore. But uh, the frightening thing for South Koreans is a government that wants to wipe them off is literally, just miles away. And South Koreans still get a little nervous when the leader of North Korea starts to make threats. And you have at the 30th parallel the demilitarized zone. So you have Eisenhower in Vietnam, the emerging pattern of Soviet-backed communist revolutions and American-backed capitalist democratic governments, Korea, Vietnam, and we're going to see more and more. The U.S. backs this president, Ngo Dinh Diem, South Vietnamese president after the French withdrawal. He was assassinated November 2nd, 1963. Kennedy kind of gives the okay for that. And it leads to a coup, and the South Vietnamese government just, begins to get out of hand, and the whole situation starts to snowball here. I want to talk about Cuba just for a little bit. Fidel Castro takes over Cuba, and he is decidedly communist. And it appears that he is acting alone, but he's really acting with the backing of Moscow, with the communist, with the Soviet Union. The problem with this is that Havana is only 232 miles from Miami. So Eisenhower approves a plan organized by the CIA to orchestrate a coup in Cuba, and we'll hear more about that when we begin to talk about JFK, because he is the one who inherits the plan. And we will stop right here. We'll pick up right again with Kennedy.